Honolulu Aaron Lutzi. Honolulu.
Nice one, man. Aloha.
Aloha. Second Nature, episode number 28, sending you off into the weekend. How's paradise, buddy?
Pretty good. Just praying for the hotel wireless to hold up, but so far so good. So it's fun in the sun out here. Just epic. Taking a break before the kiddos go back to school, and it's sort of everything I hoped it was going to be. So yeah, all good.
Awesome. Celebrating your daughter's birthday yesterday, and here we are podcasting. You're still grinding away while
You
over
know what's
there in Hawaii.
the wildest thing about yesterday was my daughter's 10th birthday and my wife's, first decade as a parent. And we were talking about just like what you thought about before you had kids and almost like the fear of like, am I going to know what to do? Am I going to know how this is going to work? And I asked her yesterday, like, well, how do you feel a decade on? Do you feel like you know what you're doing? Do you feel confident with everything? And I think for both of us, it's not so much confidence, but it's really just a little bit more comfort with the uncomfortableness of being a parent and not always knowing what to do. And I feel like that translates so much into every other part, like with what I'm doing and what you're doing business wise. Like after a while, you just kind of become one with it, and it's uncomfortable at many times, but you just kind of continue to roll with it. I don't know if you have a similar feeling or not, but
I
that seemed
do.
to be something that stood out.
And while you're Honolulu, tomorrow I'm Euro Debo. I'm heading over to UTMB, flying from San Francisco to Geneva through London, and that'll be my longest trip away from my family. I think about 9 days in the 2
Wow.
years my son's been alive. So I'm simultaneously like looking forward to being able to have a couple of days where the thing that you lose when you're a parent is the ability to, after a long work day, to just like flop on the couch and stare at your phone and just recover. And I'm hoping, even though it's going to be obviously a very busy work week, that I'm going to be able to carve out a little alone time, a little me time to recharge and then come back and be super dad again. So, anyway,
That's
super,
the
super fun.
Absolutely. That's the secret. When you go on these long trips, the second you arrive, you have to be super dad again. So good luck with the recharge.
Right, because
If
she's gonna hand him straight over to me and say, "Get this mongrel out of my sight."
sending strength to Harmony right now.
Yeah, she's gonna have a little bit extra help. So anyway, launching into it, Lutzi, we got a fun docket here today. We're gonna talk about Arcteryx, specifically about the wins they've had in footwear. We haven't really talked much about Arcteryx, which is a brand that I have always really, really loved. And so this will be a fun opportunity to talk about that. Then you're going to educate us a little bit on the factory racing team model versus the privateer model in mountain biking or cycling in general. We'll expand a little bit on our content playbook conversation from last week where you blew my mind and close with BPC. It's going to be a good episode. Let's start with the Arcteryx. So this was some news that we saw in footwear news, which is a place where we've had a lot of great material for the podcast. And the title for the article that I saw was Amer Sports raises guidance after Q2 beat led by Arcteryx. And in that article, it says, within Arcteryx, footwear sales grew more than 100% year over year in Q2. Penetrating the footwear business also grew from 6 to 10%, and the brand plans to reach 20% penetration over the next few years. Launching into it, Aaron, what are your high level thoughts on Arcteryx, the brand, and specifically, their winning strategy now and how footwear plays into it? Because I think it's an extension of a conversation we've had over many episodes.
Well, I think one of the things that Arcteryx has been doing for a long time is just building up what their brand is, what it means to sort of the everyday outdoor consumer. And so when you've got that momentum, when you've got that established understanding of what it is that you do, which is make high quality outdoor apparel, it should be ideally easier to expand into other zones. And so when they kind of tackled the trail running space, developing shoes, developing outerwear, developing all these pieces, they carry in that sort of brand into that area, and they should be able to be successful. They also have distribution in most of the outdoor outlets. They have a lot of momentum going, and this is sort of playbook of how you would do a product line extension, right? They've already done all the things to make it easy to then extend their product line into trail running. And these numbers just show that they did the right things. They did the right X's and O's. They developed the correct product, which I think is the one part that's the most important bit. And now you're seeing the consumers respond to that. It's not as easy as just being like, let's get a pair of trail shoes and slap an Arcteryx logo on it. It's really about, let's make really great shoes that work for trail runners and put it out into the market, because we have the ability to expand our brand. And now people are responding accordingly, which is exciting for them. It means that they have a chance to really continue to expand and grow, like we're seeing with these numbers.
Arcteryx has that unicorn thing that all brands aspire towards, and that their name is synonymous with premium product, right? When you see the Arcteryx logo, or you see somebody rocking an Arcteryx jacket, you just know that it's a good product. And that is like a really hard reputation to develop. And now that being extended to footwear, where admittedly over the last decade plus, they have tried to be successful in the footwear market, never really breaking through. And they've sort of had a similar trajectory in terms of their product assortment and their product penetration as the North Face, though a few years behind. But the North Face, obviously similar to Arcteryx, starting with soft goods and outerwear, and then having it be a real slog to get into the footwear game. This is a subject that we've talked about with Lululemon also being an apparel first brand trying to get into the footwear space. And then conversely, brands like On starting in footwear and trying to get into apparel, similar with Hoka, not always easy. And it seems like Arcteryx is finally breaking through. I mean, growing sales 100% year over year. That's obviously a sign that the market is receptive to the new product. And I thought this would be a really fun extension to the conversation that we had on last week's Friday episode, where at the end we were talking about how Portland has become the Silicon Valley for the footwear and apparel industry. And we sort of speculated that maybe that's not necessarily a good thing, and that's leading to this feeling of commoditization. But importantly, and I know this for a fact, obviously Arcteryx was founded in British Columbia in the Vancouver area, but their footwear design studio is in Portland. So this is a good counterexample to that conversation from last week of they picked off some high level executive from Nike to head up their footwear design studio in Portland, where they probably had much more talent to select from, rather than if they set it up in Vancouver or Denver or something like that. And that, I think, is probably the biggest contributing factor to this massive growth in footwear sales. So a good counterexample. And also Speedland's another example of that, right? Like Dave Dombrow, Kevin Fallon, the two founders of Speedland. Dave was the chief design officer at Under Armour. Kevin worked at innovation. They're based in Portland too, probably one of the most innovative and disruptive small brands in the space. So, so I guess, proving ourselves wrong, or taking the counterexample from last week's episode. I think it's pretty interesting. Portland, that it's probably the reason why Arcteryx grew 100%.
Yeah, I think it's unfair to generalize all designers or all, salespeople or marketing from that are coming from Nike as one way or another. There's clearly tons and tons of talent. And in the history of Portland too, there's a lot of people in the art scene or went to this, there was this place called Pensole Shoe Design Academy that existed in Portland for a long time. So there's a lot of history of people coming here with that intention. And maybe they didn't get in the door at Nike or Adidas, or they've been honing their craft. They've been in the same circles. They've been working their way up at Nike, but didn't get a shot to create the shoe that they wanted to create. And now these other opportunities are kind of coming through. I remember on a previous episode, we also talked about this big investment that Portland was making. It was like $100 million into manufacturing in downtown Portland. And I wonder when we're going to start seeing some of the output from that coming through too. That's got to be not terribly far off as well. But this is a great sign that, there is talent being utilized in Portland in a meaningful way. And the fact that it's impacting Arcteryx in such a substantial way, Speedland in such a substantial way, like it's extremely promising. And this could be kind
It's
of the
so
next phase.
crazy. I mean, it's so crazy to think of the number of brands that are there. Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, Columbia, On, Hoka, Arcteryx, Lululemon, Speedland. Like all the footwear people from all those businesses reside and work in Portland. That's pretty insane.
It could be, just Portland's a pretty great place. You and well, I still live there. You live there for a bit, you know. Maybe it's the Voodoo Donuts is just dragging everybody to Portland. I don't know.
It is pretty cool, and I mean, I think the Silicon Valley analog is relevant here. I've got another quote here from the article that I want to read, and then I want to talk about something else because I think there's an interesting conversation about the parent company, Amer Sports, and how they position the brands within that portfolio. Reading quickly a quote, it says, "We see footwear as probably the most substantial economic engine of growth inside the company," Arcteryx Chief Executive Officer Stuart Heselton told Footwear News in an interview. "And as we look into the future, the investments and the importance of footwear for our business is one of the most exciting parts of our innovation strategy." So, pretty obvious, something we've talked about in the past, but when you're really saturated or well known, at least as a premium outdoor apparel and outerwear business, the biggest way that you can grow is introducing a high quality footwear offering. But the challenge then is to keep it premium. And it seems like they're finally doing that. Moving to this other conversation I thought would be interesting. So, Arcteryx is owned by Amer Sports. Amer Sports owns a portfolio of brands, including Solomon, Peak Performance, Atomic, I think Wilson tennis rackets, something like that. But I wanted to specifically focus on Solomon versus Arcteryx because I think this is something that I don't know explicitly, but I have speculation around as somebody who's deep and endemic to the trail running marketplace. Arcteryx is notably absent, although this new footwear offering does have at least one high quality trail running option. But I believe my personal speculation, in short, Lutzi, is that they try very hard for Arcteryx not to compete with Solomon. And so the reason Arcteryx is notably absent and doesn't really sponsor a lot of trail running athletes or events is because they don't want to cannibalize Solomon's business, who is also sort of positioned as a premium player in trail running and who has been one of, if not the most revolutionary brand in trail running since it's been on this massive growth trajectory over the last 15 or 20 years. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to talk about. So Solomon is more positioned as the trail running brand, where Arcteryx is more positioned as the climbing brand. Any comments you want to include there?
I mean, what would be the worst part of having number one and number two in that space? You have this concept of like steel sharpens steel, and I think it would be really interesting to see the two sort of go head to head in that capacity. I think if you look at the rest of their lineups, they do have kind of a similar setup with snow and ski and some of the other outer wear and outdoor sports that they support. So they are pretty similar all the way across the board. The Venn diagram has a ton of crossover. I actually think, why not just go for it and see who wins in the end and just double up on how much you can learn and how much you can push and progress the brands and develop technologies and just see, like, why would you just not focus in on crushing it if that category is just exploding right now? I'd rather have number one and number two, for example, as opposed to like not even trying. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Adam Campbell, who's a longtime friend of mine, who's been an Arcteryx athlete for almost 20 years. He's sort of retired more or less from high level competition, but I know he works internally at the brand now to help them with their trail running strategy. Also, something we kind of talked about last week of like setting athletes up for graduation where they can contribute to the brand that they represented as athletes and move into a marketing role, sports marketing role, product role, etc. So Adam Campbell's a good example of that, and I'm sure he's advocating for the sport of trail running enthusiastically internally at Arcteryx. But I don't know. I find it interesting as somebody who is a massive admirer of Arcteryx. In fact, I think they're my favorite brand in outdoor, period. I wish they were more involved in trail running. And I feel personally like obviously their apparel product is great and it should be successful in the trail running market. You should see more of it, in my opinion. And maybe the reason you don't is because they're focused more on the highly technical outerwear for winter sport. And also, they more of their marketing is focused on climbing. So in the summer sport, it's sort of rock climbing and alpinism rather than skiing, snowboarding, for example, where Solomon is like ski, Nordic ski, ski mountaineering in the winter, and then very hard trail running in the summer. And yeah, again, just to repeat myself, my speculation is that they do that intentionally to make sure they're not cannibalizing each other's businesses
If you
because they're
were,
both positioned in a similar way, is my point, as premium brands.
yeah, absolutely. But I don't think necessarily that trail running is saturated when it comes to premium brands. So if you were going to take Arcteryx, say they just like handed you the keys to the trail running program, what would you do? Would you make it differentiated from Solomon? Would you go after kind of the same looking, same kind of athletes, same kind of marketing plan? Like if you're in the driver's seat, what would you do with Arcteryx and trail running?
It's a good question. I mean, they now have the product, right? So for them having the head to toe kit, not only having great soft goods, waterproof jackets, and a pack, but now you've got the footwear. If I were them, it would be great to try and land a whale of an athlete, maybe a Canadian specifically, because that sort of speaks to the origin of the brand itself and probably where their biggest market is. Thinking off the top of my head who that individual could be, I have a couple of ideas, though maybe the better idea would be to try and nurture a young group of ascendant Canadian trail running athletes and tell some stories around that about, okay, Arcteryx, we want to get serious in this market and we're identifying this next generation crew. We're keeping it within Canada because that's important to us. And we're going to try and grow our presence in the sport with this representation of the next generation and try and help them build their careers and create the next Adam Campbell, for example. I don't know. It's just an idea off the top of my head without putting much thought into it.
Just putting you on the spot, man. I think that's great. And I think the ability to do that storytelling and play the long game with helping develop the sport, develop young athletes, do storytelling. I mean, these are all, would be perfect for them to actually grow and do it in a way that's maybe not that threatening to Solomon. Solomon's got all of the top athletes or a large chunk of the top athletes. And, they do storytelling and all that as well. But maybe to come in with a little different mix than what Solomon has in a way that's non-threatening, but also still valuable to growing the sport. Because I think you could meaningfully impact the sport of trail running in a way that doesn't cannibalize what Solomon is doing. And you could come with a different kind of vibe, story, support, and still continue to help this thing grow because trail running is absolutely exploding right now.
You know what else they could do that Solomon has done really well is find the multi-season athletes. So where Killian Jornet and Remy Bonnet and Sophia Lockley, for example, have been competitive at the highest levels in ski mountaineering and Nordic skiing, respectively, while also being world champion level trail runners. Arc has a similar brand position where they want to be a 4-season year outdoor brand. And so having a 4-season type athlete who exists at the pinnacle like the Killians and Remy's and Sophia's, maybe that's a good way to do it. And there are a few examples, but obviously it's not easy to pick off those top tier type athletes. But I mean, if I were an athlete, this actually goes back to something you said a million times of like, going to a place you've usually, spoken about this in a professional context when you're picking your job path, career path, where you're going to work, where you can have a bigger impact. So like if you're a member of a large team, call it a Solomon or North Face or Hoka or On or whatever, but you have an opportunity to like start a good trail running team from the ground up with Arcteryx, like what a great opportunity that would be for the right athlete, where you would have a much bigger impact on their business, where you'd probably have a better seat at the table when it comes to product decisions, marketing decisions, um, maybe even like storytelling media decisions. I don't know. I think that would be a really interesting opportunity for the right athlete. Is like, even if you have a really solid deal at a good brand and have a good relationship with them, are you making as big of an impact there as you could with a brand like Arc, who's getting into the trail space and clearly has momentum behind them, as evidenced by this massive increase in sales? I think that would be pretty sweet.
I dig it. I'm in.
Cool. That was a fun little brainstorming sesh. Shout
Yeah.
out to Arcteryx. Do you have something you want to say there?
No, I think that's exciting to see that they're getting into the space, that they're developing and they're getting results in the space. There's, I mean, plenty of brands that we've seen who have tried to maybe develop shoes, where they've been soft goods in the past and they're trying to get into the space. And I think ultimately what all this really comes down to, whether you're a premium brand or not, like you have to come with the right product. You have to come with the real stuff, and you can't just slap your name on something that looks like a shoe. It has to be the real deal. And I think that's what people are responding to more than anything, more than the brand, more than who they sponsor, who they work with. They're seeing what these shoes look like, and they're giving them that consideration, and in this case actually picking it up. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Just make good stuff. It seems so
Yep.
simple, but ultimately the community has responded accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Let's move on. And from my core, from my world of trail running to your world of mountain biking, we were having an interesting conversation on the phone the other day just about sort of the factory racing team model versus the privateer model. So maybe start from first principles, set some definitions for each, what the pros and cons of each option, and we can go from there.
Absolutely. You've talked a little bit about this idea of having the free trail factory team. And I think there's something there that we could kind of riff on. But you're right. Let's just start from first principles. So, specific to mountain bike racing, and this applies in almost every single sport, but I'm just going to use the mountain bike world as my example here. There's really two different types of essentially race sponsorship. So there's the factory team racing, and then there's the privateer. The factory team racing is someone who joins a team where everything is essentially provided for them. You just got to show up and race. You get all of your gear handed to you. You've got a mechanic on site. You've got someone who's, managing your hotel, your food, pre-post race, body work kind of stuff. It's kind of an all-inclusive resort. I guess I'm in Hawaii, so that works. But it really is like all you have to focus in on is being the best athlete you can possibly be, and you don't have to put any mental energy into the rest of the program. Someone else is handling all of that for you. And we talked about this last week when it was like uh, talking about getting a contract and how much mental energy went into that. The stress of having to deal with, is this contract going to come through? Is it not going to come through? Is this going to work out? Or am I going to have to go get a job? That level of mental strain actually impacts your performance in a pretty meaningful way. And a lot of riders, or a lot of athletes overall, opt for this factory racing model because it takes so much of the guesswork out. It just kind of pushes all that strain onto another person who hopefully can deliver on getting sponsors, getting the right product. But in that factory racing setup, you also give up control. So, for example, if you want to ride a specific kind of bike or component, you might not get to ride that. You might have to do whatever the team deal was because they are trying to fund the entire umbrella to pay for your travel, for your mechanic, for your hotel, for the bodywork people. And so there's definitely a bit of a trade-off there. So you save some mental energy, but you might not get to actually use the best product, or you might just not have control over the things that you want to have control over, but that's the trade-off. When you switch over to a privateer setup, that's when you have 100% control over everything, but then you also have to put the mental energy into the sponsor relationships, developing the contracts, making sure your hotel is booked, finding a mechanic, or doing your own stuff. And it can be really stressful, but then you have the control of riding exactly what you want to ride. Now, the perfect setup is somewhere in the middle, or being on a team that's so dominant and powerful that they actually get all the sponsors that you want. And if you're the marquee athlete for that team, you have even more control over what that looks like. But a lot of athletes opt for this privateer setup because they can do a lot more and a lot different things besides racing, and they can kind of expand in a lot of other ways. And that's interesting. Or maybe they're, trying to do something other than racing, and the privateer model works better. Usually in the setup of privateer, you're the only one and you're a one of one. Factory racing, there's usually a team of like 5 to 10 people that are also racing. So again, you don't have to win every race to get all the benefits from it. You could have somebody else on the team that wins a race, and then you win the next one or whatever, and it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off as well. So I think factory racing
How
is
do the
let
brands think about it? Because I mean, so from my perspective, as somebody who doesn't know as much, it seems like the factory racing teams are quasi independent and maybe even not owned by the brands and usually have multiple sponsors. And so the athletes then are contracted not necessarily with the brands, but with the team themselves. The team takes care of the sponsorship, brings the other resources, as you said, the mechanics, the massage therapists. Is because from my perspective, that's what I think would be interesting to bring to trail running, right? Is like have a team, the Free Trail Factory Racing team, for example, bring in, the brands we work with, for example. So it could be like Speedland and Boa and the Feed and Osprey. And then we go get a group of 4 or 5 independent athletes who would otherwise sign personal deals with a footwear brand
right.
and try and build out the infrastructure to help them be successful while also boosting our brand partners. That's basically how it works in cycling.
That is correct. And I think what Free Trail specifically would bring to that as well is the content side of that, right? And a lot of these teams are trying to do the same thing, where they're trying to add in more and more and more to sweeten the deal. And it makes it easy for the brands to be involved because they don't have to set up their own program, because there is a ton of infrastructure that comes with all this stuff. And if a brand can just pay a one-time fee and then spread their risk out over 5 to 10 athletes and then get the results, because ultimately, if somebody wins on your bike or your shoes or whatever, you get to reap the benefit, whether you were putting all the effort into the infrastructure or if you just wrote a check. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a great deal for brands, as long as you're working with the right people and you have an ability to do that, as well as you could pull those athletes in for product development. So it's not like they're inaccessible to you if you're
Right.
sponsoring the factory team.
Yeah, you could use them in your marketing. So I actually just pulled up. So Komen Saw, remember they were my BPC when I went to that UCI competition over in Austria earlier this summer, and they I think have multiple factory racing teams. The one I just pulled up is Komen Saw Noble Factory Racing Team. So Noble, if I'm not mistaken, is a wheel
Wheels. Yep.
manufacturer.
Mhm.
So Comensaw makes the bikes, Noble makes the wheels, and then it looks like they have multiple other sponsors, including 100%, which makes the sunglasses and goggles. So effectively, Comensaw Noble are the title sponsors of this factory racing team. Other smaller brands are able to participate as well. And so you sort of crowdsource the ability to, yeah, I guess all benefit from the successes of the athletes on the team, while also theoretically giving those athletes a higher likelihood of success based on the additional support that's inherent with the team model.
I do think that you have a little less flexibility, though, if you're on a factory racing team, because the sponsorships are basically set based off of, in most cases, racing. So if you want to do anything other than racing, you're basically going against the program, or you're not benefiting the deliverables that are agreed upon on the higher level. So say, for example,
So
you
if you're
wanted,
a project athlete,
yeah,
to use
yeah.
Aaron Lutzi's terms, you wouldn't fit on a factory team.
Unless it was already kind of set up. Like, I think you could do something really interesting. What if you had a factory racing team that was specific to storytelling? That would be really fascinating to see someone build that out, with the idea that instead of getting race wins, you're getting tons of visibility in a meaningful way. But there's this attachment of this sort of look and feel that comes with it. Actually, this was a Commensal team in mountain biking a while back. The Atherton family. It's Rachel Atherton, Dan, and G, and they all raced together. But they had this really cool look and feel to the kits that they wore, and they did do a bit of storytelling that kind of came along with it. And there was something really cool that was built into that. And I think having that kind of look and feel that everyone sees, having the storytelling that comes with it, there are ways to do this that could be really interesting. And again, going back to, most factory teams now are trying to do some level of content, but no one's gone all the way to being like, we're a factory team that does only content. But just like everything else, it's all about visibility. It's all about showing what these products can do, showing the brand's investment and being credible. I don't see why you couldn't do a content based factory team. It would just take a little bit of effort on the front end to really align with the right people that wanted what you were offering, really.
And at the highest level, like at the downhill UCI World Cup races, as an example, are there examples of both privateers and factory racing team athletes? Because to me, when I was in Leogang, Austria, it seemed like it was mostly factory.
It's mostly factory, but there are the odd few privateers, or there's athletes who go out and build like a tiny team of two or three racers to kind of join them in an effort. Um, Nico Maleli is a great example. He basically stopped riding for main brands, had someone custom make him frames, and then got some other riders on those frames. And they're doing actually really well right now. It's a small team of just a couple riders who basically made their own bike. So there are some really cool examples of privateers kind of breaking through, but it's pretty rare overall. Having that structure, that setup, like you said, the mental side of the sports really intense and really important. And to have all of that stuff taken care of, especially when you're going to like in mountain biking, you're going to like a resort uh town, and there's all kinds of stuff that's going on. The racing, making sure the bikes are all dialed in, a lot of these mechanics are up until like midnight the night before the race working on it. That wouldn't be
Yeah.
feasible to be working on your bike until midnight, wake up, and then race against someone who went to bed at like 7 p.m. I think it's necessary at the highest level of racings, but there are examples of people who have pulled it off. But usually everyone has a team around them in one way, shape, or form. Even the privateers have people in their corner helping them out. It's not like you just show up off the plane and send it.
Right. So one of the guys I've been following recently is Keegan Swenson, who's been sort of dominating
Yes.
the like Lifetime Grand Prix mountain biking gravel racing series. He just smashed Leadville again a couple of
Hmm.
weeks ago.
That was his fourth
And
win for sure.
yeah, man, he killed it. My buddy, an old friend, John Gaston from Aspen, got second, but I think Keegan won by like 15 minutes, which in a 6 hour race like that is winning by a massive margin. And I think this maybe is a good example of like a privateer athlete who also has started like his own mini factory team. And I don't know if this is totally accurate, but just like having followed him on Instagram for a little while, he always like is tagging this little group called the Hit Squad. So you can find a link to their Instagram page from his page. So we'll make sure to link to this stuff. But it looks like it's just three people, Keegan and two others. He's sponsored by Santa Cruz, and I think has his own other personal sponsors. And then Santa Cruz is sort of like maybe also supporting these other two athletes. And it feels to me like it's just their own little mini factory racing team that they've set up independently.
I'm not a
That
hundred
seem
percent.
accurate?
I'm not 100% sure on Keegan's actual status. I know he's sponsored by Santa Cruz, but I'm not sure what level of support they're actually doing. Gravel racing is closer to trail running though, where you kind of show up and blow up on a racetrack, where downhill racing, cross country racing, you're lapping something, you're really putting some serious damage to your bike as you're sending it through, or crashing, or trying
Mm,
to get faster and faster with every lap. And so the need for mechanics, the need for that race support, I think is a lot more important. Whereas gravel racing and trail racing, as far as I know, seems like you can kind of just bring your equipment and then you send it on the day, and that's it. I know I'm simplifying in a major way, but I think the infrastructure necessary for mountain bike racing is probably a bit higher than gravel and trail racing.
yeah, interesting. So in that case, it's more valuable to have the factory team behind you. I don't know, man. I feel like we could borrow this idea in trail running, and I've wanted to have something like that with free trail attached to it for a little bit. So maybe the free trail factory racing team could be born in 2025 or beyond. But this actually reminds me also, this is somewhat relevant to a conversation we've had a number of times and specific to this, conversation we're having now. And speaking of Leadville, the Leadville 100 run was last Saturday, and David Roche won and broke the 19-year-old legendary course record by Matt
Amazing.
Carpenter.
Wow.
What makes this interesting for Second Nature and the business angle is David is also the most successful coach in the sport. And he and his wife, Megan is actually David's coach. So she coached him to this amazing victory. But they have they're a bunch of the top pros in the sport they coach, and a number of people from the middle and the back of the pack, and their coaching business is called Some Work All Play. And they also have a very popular podcast, so they're really good with storytelling. I actually just had them on the Free Trail podcast last week, so it was good timing. I'm taking full credit for his victory and course record based on the emotional boost from the podcast. But my point is that David intentionally is unsponsored, so he can use whatever product he wants. And so if you see photos of him finishing and breaking the course record, he's wearing a shirt with his own logo on it. He's wearing a hat with his own logo on it. And he's wearing a pair of Adidas shoes, who he has no affiliation with, but that he uses because they're obviously, from his perspective, the right product for that specific application that carried him to victory. So something that we've talked about, obviously that's like the outer fringe of privateer, when you're actually wearing your own products, or at least products with your own logo on them. But like having his own independent business that keeps him in a healthy place financially, not being dependent on the contracts from the brands, that's like ultimate privateer, right? And something we've
Absolutely.
talked about a number of times is like, that is maybe the evolution in the future, is like the top athletes not being dependent on brands, but having their own brands and having their own products, or just like monetizing in a different way so they can use whatever products they want.
That's the dream, right? Like, I'm just going to use the best stuff that I believe is going to get me to the finish line the fastest, and whether I make it or I buy it, that's it. I want to go back quickly to the Free Trail Factory team, because I've kind of been noodling on this while we've been talking about it. And I think what you could be doing with that, there's so many different approaches that you could have, but you've learned so much over your time in the industry as a racer, as a media, empire, everything else that you've got going on. And you have this really interesting ability to kind of be the mentor to a lot of up and coming athletes, where you could be kind of breaking ground for them, giving them the resources they need, whether it's support to get to races, the right gear to do it, to wear at the races, and the storytelling to help them establish themselves in the industry as racers. You could pick the talent, you could support the talent, and you could put them in the right place to be successful and have a really meaningful impact on their career. I think at the outset, you would want to lay out what you're actually trying to do with the team. And I think what you could do with Free Trail Factory Racing is more than just, hey, we're going to get you to the races, but we are going to just put our thumb on the scale of your success as a trail runner. And that would be coveted by all the up and coming athletes that are coming into the sport that want to be the next Dylan Bowman, you know? And the ability to put them on so many platforms and give them what they need to be successful is what free trail means to them. I think that's really what it comes down to. What does it mean to be on this team? In the same way, what does it mean to be on Red Bull? It was never just about the paycheck. It was about the support. It was about the APC. It was about all these other elements that kind of came along with it. What did it mean to be a Speedland athlete? Oh, it's these shoes. It's this, like what is the why for these teams? And I feel like you could very clearly define that proposition both to the potential partners as well as the potential athletes that you'd be bringing in to be on your factory team. And that's what makes it really exciting. I'm here for it.
I've had this idea that it was in some ways inspired by conversations I've had with you of like the Free Trail Fellowship, where if we could bring in an aspiring pro trail running athlete who doesn't quite have the support necessary to make a full-time go of it and give them a job, or at least like an internship level role where they're managing our social media and helping with whatever research and operations and all the different things that we have going on, and gain that professional experience working at Free Trail, but then we pay them or support them in such a way to where we give them opportunities to go race internationally and build that experience and potentially build a career for themselves. I love that idea, the Free Trail Fellowship. So if you're in the market, just go ahead and send me an application and we'll see if that's practical. But also, I had a Galaxy Brain idea while we were talking about this. So this is our occasional segment, Galaxy Brain. You said there's no real factory racing teams that are mostly focused on project athletes. So what if in trail running, the factory racing team was like the FKT factory racing team? So instead of racing, you put together a group of like 4 or 5 of these more adventure speed record FKT type athletes. And there are many examples of them in trail running, and lean into just that as your point of differentiation from other athlete teams, for example. And then you just have to figure out brand partnerships to make the whole thing pencil out and to make sure that, um, you know, it pencils and that it works. It works for everybody. But that's maybe an interesting Galaxy Brain idea. The FKT factory racing team.
I think that's really interesting in that you could probably sell sponsorships against each one of the projects as well. So if there's something that's specific to a region, maybe there's a regional partner for that. Maybe there's actually the tourism board of that zone even gets involved, right? Depending on where it is in the world. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of build up partnership around specific projects. So think of it also in terms of like, yeah, you probably have a blanket group of sponsors that support the entire team, but then project by project, you could also build in partners along the way to kind of even incentivize the completion of the FKT. Maybe there's a bonus that the athletes get for successful completion or something along those lines. I think that's really interesting, and that's a great way to do it. The other side of that to think about is, free trail, you're doing so much and traveling all over the place and filming all kinds of things. But if you're going to make that channel grow, you're going to need help. You need more people that are making content for it, that are, taking the filming into their own hands and delivering finished content for the channel to continue building out the catalog there. So it's not, podcasts, trailgating, etc. You could build out an entire new catalog of content using that team and giving a whole new library to the overall free trail channel. And I think there's something really valuable there that allows you to take a step back and really focus in on the stuff that you truly, truly want to do, and letting some of the other athletes step forward into that place. I know with TTL, we were talking to Eric Lagerstrom recently,
Yeah.
and he's working on this
That triathlon life. For
correct,
those who aren't familiar with the jargon. Yeah.
or who missed a few episodes back, just saying.
Yeah.
He's got a development team. And one of the things that we were talking about is this idea of, they're developing these athletes and supporting them and paying out bonuses and helping them do their thing. but with the idea that those people are going to start contributing to it. So it's not just Eric and Paula every single time on the videos for TTL, but they're also telling other stories that kind of follow similar themes and narratives. So I think there's a really interesting way that you could build out the free trail content offering based off of that FKT Racing factory program.
This is such a good idea. I just pulled it up. So they call it the TTL Devo Squad for development squad. And it looks like they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 athletes on their development team.
Yeah, and they're
And it
amazing.
seems like they're taking that model that I just articulated, because it seems like these are aspiring pros, if not like younger pros who are still probably in the early phases of making a name for themselves and building experience competing at the highest level. And so what a great opportunity to give them a little bit of a bump, a little bit of a boost, but then also, yeah, get value in return in terms of having them help with storytelling and, you know, being able to leverage their influence and their accomplishments to further boost the TTL brand.
Yeah, and
Very
in fact,
cool.
Eric and Paula just got married, I think, last week. And so this week's newsletter from them was all about their development team. And those athletes got a chance to be, in the forefront of all of TTL's output because, yeah, they got to go off and do like real life stuff. And so but they had people still like keeping it going on the media side of things. So I think there's something really interesting for this where we're not burning ourselves out just cranking content all the time. We've got help in a different way.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just me, but I kind of feel like the traditional athlete sponsorship model is dying or is ripe for disruption with something like this. I mean, this David Roche example is perfect, right? Like that is a massive moment for the sport. Unequivocally, you know, the biggest result of the year. So far, I guess that could be argued against, you know, what Katie Scheid and Jim did at Western States. UTMB's around the corner, which will swallow all the oxygen in the trail running digital space for a little while. But just the photos of David crossing the finish line, breaking this legendary course record at Leadville, which is itself one of the most iconic 100-mile races, and not wearing somebody else's brand and having his own logo on his chest. So when people are being introduced to him for the first time and they zoom in on the products that he's using, they're like, oh, what is this swap thing? Oh, it's actually his own coaching business and media platform instead of like the three stripes from Adidas or a Nike swoosh or a North Face logo or whatever. It's really interesting to think of how, like, what impact that has on David and on his business and on his brand that would otherwise be swallowed by somebody else. I don't
Yeah.
know. Really interesting.
That's the ultimate credibility for his coaching. Hey, I've got the course record here. But you're right. Like if he'd been wearing Adidas stuff during, an Adidas kit, everyone would have assumed that he was an Adidas athlete. And I think this goes back to the discussion we were having with the unsponsored gear from Bandit, where so many other brands just gobbled up all of the positive momentum from people winning stuff when that person went out and paid full price for that gear at a sporting goods store. Um, being able to change that up is a pretty significant thing.
As I've told you a number of times, and I'm sure I've mentioned on the pod, my number one professional aspiration in life is to have my own brand. And the idea of wearing a shirt with my Free Trail signpost logo on it while I break the tape, or somebody else wearing that, because, you know, let's be honest, there's I'm not in danger of breaking the Leadville course record anytime soon. Although hopefully I can build some momentum back into my own racing. Point is, I want to have that. I want to have that, whether I'm wearing my own product or other people are wearing it. That would be pretty darn awesome. Should we touch this content playbook thing or save it for a future episode? We're already getting a little long-winded here.
Yeah, we can save it for a future one. We had some really
Yeah.
good responses on the content playbook from the last episode that you and I did together, and I definitely have some other stuff that I want to talk about, but we can kick it down the line a little bit.
Okay, let's save that for the next one. So closing with BPC. I don't have a great one, so you got us started.
Okay. Well, actually, speaking of the content playbook discussion that you and I had, I think Cristiano Ronaldo might secretly be a listener to Second Nature because
Oh,
to- today
tell me.
he launched his own YouTube channel. Another athlete taking control of their media empire. Cristiano Ronaldo launched a YouTube channel today, and in one day has amassed 23 million subscribers. Pretty good first day. Now,
Is
what's
that more than second nature?
slightly,
Slightly more. Okay.
but you're welcome, Cristiano. What's interesting is that just like we were talking about last week, he launched with a ton of different formats. So he does a little bit of, you know, a little bit of day in the lifestyle stuff, but a lot of the content that he made are formats that could easily be replicated week over week. And it'll be really fun to watch what he does with this channel. But he essentially launched with 7 or 8 different clips, a lot of different styles to give everybody a piece of Ronaldo. He's got some short form content, he's got some long form content. There's a video that talks about, how he deals with pressure as, one of the greatest soccer players of all time. But then he also has some stuff for this family where they kind of go back and forth on some stuff. Some of it's in Spanish, like sorry, Portuguese, I think. Anyways, and some of it's in English, and yeah, he just offers something up for everybody, and it's going to be fun to watch his content strategy evolve. But the fact that even after being one of the most successful athletes of all time, arguably, he's now taking media into his own hands, and I'm just sitting back with a giant smile on my face. Another athlete who gets it. I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, you got to own it like Oprah. You got to own your media output. You got to own the conversation. You have to take control of it and start putting your stuff out there into the world. And Christian Ronaldo has done
That's
exactly
the
that.
future. I mean, social media, that era also is coming to a close, right? Like in the same way that I feel like the traditional athlete sponsorship thing is, I mean, it's not going to die, but I think you're right. People are going to take more control over this stuff. And Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, one of the biggest athletes in the world, but this can be replicated. I mean, Paula and Eric are a perfect example of this in the triathlon space. I haven't watched any of it, but I saw linked on Twitter Devin Booker's YouTube vlogs from the Olympics, who was on Team USA on the basketball team. So yeah, just like having a content team of filmers, editors, producers, if you can justify that and satisfy the, whatever resources are necessary to put a team like that together, that's the wave of the future. And I think, Sam Long is another example of this in the triathlon space, who I think has a really popular YouTube channel. I think Gwen Jorgensen was doing that for a while. It'll
So
be more and more common.
yeah, one of the things I was going to talk about in our content playbook discussion today was actually this relationship between Danny McCaskill, arguably one of the most famous mountain bikers in the world, and Cut Media. So, one of the biggest pushbacks we got last week is like, hey, I'm a one-man show, like I can't do all these different formats you're talking about and also do what I'm already doing. And this example from Cut Media, Stu Thompson is the guy who runs the show over there. He works with Danny McCaskill, and they met through me actually, but they met, and Stu had a video production company. He was doing a lot of mountain bike filming, and Danny had a lot of creative ideas, and they collaborated on a handful of videos together, which helped kind of rocket Danny into the stratosphere. But then Stu was able to build his own media business kind of next to what Danny was doing, and they continued to collaborate over the years. But Cut Media has produced all kinds of content for all kinds of other people, a lot of brands, a lot of live streaming, all sorts of outputs. And so this idea that, maybe you're an athlete, but maybe you do find this partner who's an incredible filmmaker that can help you get to where you want to go, and you don't have to do it all by yourself. That said, if there's anybody listening who is really interested in video production and editing and wants to be paired with an athlete, I get calls on an almost weekly basis from athletes that just need help with this stuff. Drop me a DM or blow us up on LinkedIn or whatever. And I feel like we could probably connect quite a few people here that are either athletes looking for talent or talent looking to kind of connect with athletes. But there's a big opportunity here between both sides of the content world of people coming together to help make that. Cristiano Ronaldo did not make his YouTube channel just with his phone. He brought in a content team to do the job. And now that he's got 23 million subscribers, those people are going to have a lot of work to do over the next couple of
Yep.
years.
Yeah, it paid for itself in one day. I just am looking at Cut Media right now, cutmedia.com. Whoever you know from this outfit, we got to have on the show.
Yes, Stu's amazing. I actually,
I
he
mean,
was
their
on.
work is legit. I mean, there's like Danny McCaskill's here, Courtney DeWalter, Wout Van Aert. It looks like they do some stuff in Formula One, so they're like all over the map in terms of their which sports they're exposed to.
Yeah, it's a Scottish agency. There's 12 people that work there in total, and they do really, really high level work. I'm a huge fan of Stu. I've known him forever. And actually, I just found out this week, actually, I didn't know that I was the person that introduced him to Danny. I just thought they were both Scottish. They must have known each other. And yeah, he was on a podcast, and I was listening to kind of how Cut got started and the turning points. But it really made me realize how you don't have to be an athlete doing all the work yourself. You can find a creative partner that can help take you to the next level. Where would Danny be without Cut? I don't know.
Send me that podcast. Look at you, Lutzi, in some ways responsible for Danny McCaskill, who's basically the Cristiano Ronaldo of trials biking. So, no big deal. Hana Lutzi. All right, I'll close this down here in my BPC. You know, occasionally we gotta pump our own bags here or talk our own book here on the pod. So I just gotta give a shout out to my guys at Speedland. We launched 3 new shoes for pre-order yesterday, 2 of which are like a totally brand new platform. So lower profile trail running shoes, more aggressive outsoles. They're great in the mountains. Actually, I used one of them as a BPC already. But anyway, those are on pre-order now. So go check out runspeedland.com and you can see the next generation of the best trail running shoes on the planet. And then the other thing I was going to just say is I'm leaving for UTMB tomorrow. So heading to Eurobo. And the number one thing I'm excited to do, aside from make our content, is check out all the brands and all the products.
we gotta
So
have
my
we gotta have the
favorite
full
part,
UTMB. Yeah.
right? Yeah, I should do a vlog style walkthrough the massive expo at UTMB, just as like a 90-minute BPC where I just touch and feel every single trail running product that's available right now.
I'm
So
in.
I'll have more to report on from UTMB. One of my favorite things to do at UTMB is I always post the my subjective ranking of best athlete kits, and my criteria is that the brand has to make all 3 of the important components of the kit. So apparel, footwear, and a pack. So in order to be considered, you basically have to have a head to toe kit. And then I always post my ranking of the best athlete kits from UTMB. So stay glued to your boy's Instagram story or Twitter account, and I'll be ranking the athlete kits, an extension of BPC. So anyway, that's it. And yeah, for our Second Nature audience, if you don't know what Free Trail does, go check us out on YouTube. Next week we're going to be going ham, just bringing content commentary from the 2024 UTMB, which is the biggest trail running event in the world. So I'm getting packed up, getting psyched up, and yeah, leaving tomorrow. So we'll see. I don't know if we're gonna be able to connect for a bro pod next week, but I guess we'll do our best.
We may have a pinch hitter for BroPod. Let's see how it shakes out. We'll see how the Wi-Fi in Chamonix holds out. I don't know. We'll figure this out. We got you.
Figure it out. All right. Well, awesome episode. Arcteryx. We basically started a new, factory racing team model for trail running on the podcast today. A couple good BPCs, some ideas for future guests. Your boy Stu from Cut Media. I just have their website up now. I'm going to go deep on it. Make sure you check out the show notes to our listeners where we'll link to all this stuff from today's episode. Obviously, make sure you go follow us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, etc. Closing comments, Aaron?
I'm on my way out. I'm gonna go surf.
Have a margarita or a Mai Tai or whatever they have there. And have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening.